Many people often say, the watchman himself turned out to be the thief. It sounds like just a proverb when you hear it. But today we will hear a true story that proves this saying true. This is the tale of a bank robbery in which the entire $1 million were stolen. But this was no ordinary theft. This time the robbers were the police officers themselves. The very policemen whom people trusted, from whom they expected security. They abused their power in uniforms to execute a plan that was almost perfect. They left no evidence, no holes. The investigators tried hard but could not find any crack to move the case forward. But the real twist came after this robbery. What eventually happened? To find that out, you will have to stay with the story until the end. This story begins in Midford, a quiet town in the state of Massachusetts, United States. About 60,000 people lived here. It was the 1980s. The town's condition was rapidly improving. People were spending freely. Shopkeepers were making good money, and there was a lot of cash circulating in the market. Among this growing pace and progress, there was a bank called Depositor Trust. It was considered Midford's largest and most reliable bank. People kept their most valuable things there: cash, gold, jewelry, or important documents, all in the bank's safety deposit boxes. These boxes were rented out, and one key remained with the customer, while the other stayed with the bank so that the box could be opened only in the presence of both. This system was regarded as an example of trust and security. The vault that held these safety deposit boxes was nothing short of a fortress. The entire vault was made of concrete reinforced with iron. Its walls, ceiling, and floor were all about 50 centimeters thick. That meant the bank's section was so strong that even someone who wanted to break in would find it difficult. There was a heavy steel door on it, and inside it was another special safe where the bank's deposited capital was kept. Seeing all this, it was clear that entering here was almost impossible. The vault had the latest security system installed, such as a high-tech silent alarm directly connected to the alarm company and the police station. That meant that at the slightest disturbance, the police would be notified immediately. For those times, this system could be considered almost perfect. But there was a very big weakness in this strong system. No one had thought that those entrusted with upholding the law could ever break it themselves. The mastermind behind this entire theft was Jera Clammenty. He was a captain in the Midford Police Department. The idea came to him, and because of him, one of the largest bank robberies in America was completely successful, in which $1 million USD in cash and jewelry were taken. This was not a decision taken on a whim. It was the result of corruption that had developed slowly. At the beginning, Jera had not been like this. When he first joined the police, his intentions were clear. But on the very first day, he was posted on duty with a senior officer whom everyone called Crasher, and who himself was corrupt. Crasher had his own group, policemen who covered up each other's misconduct and colluded for profit. One night, Jera and Crasher met a third policeman who was secretly stealing lounge chairs from a shop. Seeing this shook Jera a little, but Crasher straightened him out. Seeing such things and staying quiet, he said, was the wise thing to do. He told him that if you become too honest, you will be left alone and might even get into trouble, because most people are either corrupt themselves or remain silent despite knowing everything. Over time, Jera became part of that system. He realized how easy it was to steal while wearing a uniform. And most importantly, there were people around who were ready to cover up every wrongdoing. This cover system gave him the courage to use his position for his own benefit without any fear. Now Gerald was fully part of that corrupt system. His life was run on stolen money. His house was filled with stolen goods, expensive furniture, TVs, refrigerators, electronic items, everything. Yet despite all this, in people's eyes he remained an honest and strict police officer. He never arrested corrupt officers like himself, but he was very harsh on ordinary criminals. That is why people trusted him. Once he had even single-handedly arrested a dangerous gang leader. For that he was awarded the Medal of Courage. It is the highest honor in the police department given to officers who display bravery. Because of these praises and awards, he rose to a high rank in the department, and then used that position to easily hide his wrongdoings. Now Jera was living two lives, one that he showed everyone and one that was hidden. His personal life was the same. On one side was his wife and family, and on the other a hidden girlfriend with whom he had an affair. It seemed as if he was living two separate lives, one shown to the world and one he even hid from himself. With each passing year he became more brazen. His thefts grew larger and his rising influence in the police department made him fearless. Gradually he reached the point where in 1980 he took the decision. He would now rob the town's biggest bank. Planning a theft of such magnitude was not easy. An ordinary person would not even think of it. But Jera was confident that corrupt policemen like him would stand by him. So he began preparing for this operation. Tommy Day was Jera's most trusted partner in this big plan. Crasher was no longer in the scene because he had been sidelined. Tommy Day was the corrupt policeman whom Jera had met 2 years earlier. And since then they had together carried out many small and big shady operations. Their first major scheme had taken place in 1978, and it was so massive that anyone who heard about it was astonished. Jera and Tommy had stolen the real question papers for the police promotion exam. They then made copies of those papers and started selling them to policemen who wanted promotion, pricing a single paper at $5,000. This business was not confined to one town. They sold those papers across the entire state. This earned them not only good money, but also helped officers close to them, or those who paid money to benefit. Many officers who were close to them or who paid were promoted through these fraudulent means. They even gave papers free to their closest people, so that their friends could rise in rank and their entire web within the police department could be woven. In this way their network grew stronger. By 1980, Jera and Tommy had jointly made a very big decision. They would now carry out one final and largest theft. A heist so big that after doing it, they would never have to worry about anything for the rest of their lives. This was to be their retirement heist. Tommy was already a customer of that bank and he had a safety deposit box in that vault. Because of this he could enter the bank without suspicion. And this is where their planning for the robbery began. Tommy's first task was to carefully observe and memorize everything about the bank. He would go into the bank not as an ordinary customer but like a spy. He observed the size of the vault. How many boxes were there? Which safe held the bank's own cash? Where was that safe located? Even how the vault's locks worked, and how thick the walls were. He noted all of these things carefully. Tommy reported all this information back to Jera. Now the real operation planning began. Jera understood clearly that he and Tommy alone could not break this vault. They would need more people, a strong team. The first person they added to their team was also a corrupt police officer. Now there were 3 people on the team. Then they added a 4th man, Francis O'Leary. He had previously been a gangster and had considerable experience in robberies. Their team was now 4. But Jera knew there was still something missing, because the silent alarm system installed in the bank was very high-tech and sensitive. It was impossible to get inside without disabling it, and Jera had no understanding of electronic systems. So they needed a man who was an expert in this. That's when the 5th man joined their team, Bucky. He was a professional thief whom Jera had earlier arrested, but now circumstances had changed, and that same thief was going to become part of his team. Bucky had complete knowledge of alarm systems. He had previously disabled such systems in many robberies. Now the team was complete. 5 men, each with a specific responsibility. Jera, the mastermind of the entire operation. Tommy Day, his most trusted partner. The 3rd corrupt police officer Banks. Francis O'Leary, the experienced former gangster. And Bucky, the professional thief and alarm systems expert. Bucky's role was the most crucial. He had to disable the bank's alarm system. Bucky began to build a special device, a device that could block the alarm signal even when the bank's alarm was triggered, meaning even if the alarm rang, its signal would not reach either the alarm company or the police station. But this task was not easy. The bank's alarm system was very complex. It had different wirings and circuits. Bucky had to determine which wire was connected to what. If he mistakenly tampered with the wrong wire, either the alarm would immediately go off or the entire system would fail. And then suspicion would be certain. That is why they spent a full 2 months just understanding the alarm system's wire. He tested different circuits and each time restored the system exactly as it had been before, so that no bank staff or technician would notice anything wrong. Their aim was not only to turn off the alarm but to do it in such a way that no one would suspect someone had tampered with it. Because if anyone even slightly suspected, the police emergency team would activate and the whole plan would fail. But their greatest strength in this operation was their police identity. When Bucky was working inside, the other partners patrolled outside in a police car, dressed exactly like real officers. If another police officer or a civilian arrived, they would immediately leave on seeing the police car and uniform. No one would suspect that something was wrong inside. In this way, for 2 months they carefully and repeatedly tested everything without any hiccups. And finally they found the correct wire. They also understood the method by which the bank's alarm could be completely blocked. This was the first and biggest challenge of the entire robbery, and they had overcome it. Now the next step was the vault's walls. These walls were not ordinary, about 50 centimeters thick and filled with steel, reinforced concrete. When the gang inspected them closely, they realized that cutting through them with a drill would not be easy. It could take many days, and working in one place for so many continuous days during a robbery was impossible. So they had to think of a new method. They decided to abandon drilling and use dynamite instead, meaning a powerful blast creating a direct passage inward. But another difficulty arose. If the blast sound carried outside, people could be alerted. The police or nearby residents could quickly arrive. So their next worry became how to cover the noise of that explosion so no one would hear it. And that's when they came up with a unique idea. They would carry out the entire robbery on Memorial Day night. Memorial Day is when the whole town is immersed in celebration. People are out on the streets, parades take place, and the loud roar of fireworks echoes all around. The gang thought that if an explosion from dynamite occurred that night, people would assume it was just fireworks. No one would consider it suspicious. Moreover, there was another advantage that day. Memorial Day is connected to a long weekend, which meant the bank would be closed for 3 consecutive days. That meant the gang would have plenty of time to carry out the theft in no external interference. So the time to execute the plan had arrived. The gang took their positions. 4 men, Jera, Banks, Francis O'Leary, and Bucky Bott, were ready to enter the vault and carry out the robbery. The 5th member, Tommy Day, sat in the police car outside. His role was as important as those inside, patrolling the entire area to prevent any civilian or other police officer from approaching. Most importantly, Tommy was the highest-ranking officer on duty that night. So if any other police officer showed up, Tommy could easily send him somewhere else without arousing suspicion. Meanwhile, Jera and his 3 companions were completely confident that nothing could stop their plan now. Their entire team was ready to carry out the bank robbery. The very first task was to shut off the bank's alarm system. Using his special device, Bucky quickly blocked the alarm. Now the alarm signal neither reached the alarm company nor did the police receive any notification. After this, the gang had to enter the bank, but they did not break the bank's door. Instead, they chose a neighboring shop because its doors were not very strong and were easy to break. They first broke into the shop, and then reached the attic above. They reached the area under the roof. There was a wall between the bank and the shop separating them from the upper portion of the bank's vault. When they reached the attic, they saw that the wall was very thin and weak. It did not take much effort to break it. As the wall was broken, a path opened up in front of them that led directly to the space above the bank's vault room. The gang had now reached that place directly above the vault's roof. It was an empty space there where pipelines and wiring were located. The floor of this space was the roof of the vault, made of very strong reinforced concrete, about 50 centimeters thick. This roof was now their next target because by breaking it they could enter the vault. Their next objective was to make a hole in the vault's strong roof, so they could place sticks of dynamite inside. For that they first had to drill into the roof, and this was only possible when the entire outside area was completely quiet and empty. Therefore, whenever the gang planned any work that would produce loud noise like drilling or blasting, they first contacted Tommy on the radio. Tommy was constantly monitoring outside. When he told them over the radio that there was no one in the area, neither civilians nor police, only then did the inside work begin. Because if the drilling noise reached outside and someone heard it, the whole plan could be jeopardized. And once this actually happened, mid-drilling, Tommy sent an urgent message over the radio. Stop immediately. The 4 people inside stopped their work without wasting time. Tommy had seen 2 people approaching that area. They were actually the owners of a shop located in front of the bank. Although most shops were closed because of Memorial Day, these 2 had perhaps come to check or arrange some items. Tommy immediately reached them and stopped them. He calmly and convincingly told them that in this area, for the time being, there was suspicion of criminal activity, and it was not right to stay there. Tommy's uniform, his senior position, and his confidence did the job. The shopkeepers did not become suspicious. Rather, they felt reassured, seeing the swift and alert police action. The shopkeepers accepted Tommy's words and left without asking any questions. Now that the area was completely empty, Tommy signaled the team inside over the radio that they could resume their work. The gang started drilling again and made several holes one after another in the thick roof of the vault. All the holes were made carefully, so that later sticks of dynamite could be fitted into them. When this work was finished, they filled each hole one by one with sticks of dynamite. Now the preparations for the blast to break the vault's strong roof were complete. But the gang fully understood that detonating an explosion in the middle of the town was a huge risk. If the sound was very loud, nearby people, shopkeepers, or even a police officer could be alerted. That is why they had already made arrangements. They had brought along a large number of sandbags and now placed those sandbags over the dynamite in such a way that the sound of the explosion would be reduced and the blast force would be directed downward. That is, toward the vault's roof. These sandbags served a dual purpose. First, to muffle the sound of the explosion, and second, to prevent the force from spreading upwards so that nearby ceilings or walls would not be damaged. When everything was set, the holes ready, the dynamite placed, the sandbags properly positioned, the four men stepped back and hid in the nearby shop. Then they detonated the dynamite by remote control. The explosion was intense. It was loud enough to be heard at some distance. Tommy, who was patrolling outside, also clearly heard the blast. It can be assumed that many people nearby must have heard it too, but as the gang had anticipated, no one reported it. No one was suspicious because it was Memorial Day night. Fireworks were going off everywhere, and people were immersed in celebration. Whoever heard the explosion assumed it was part of the fireworks, and the gang's plan proceeded exactly as intended. The dynamite blast did make a large hole in the vault's roof, but some of the thick iron rebars under the roof remained intact. The blast did not completely break them. However, the gang had prepared for this. They had also brought a welding torch and now began cutting those iron rebars slowly with its help. This work was not easy. It took time, but after considerable effort they finally succeeded in entering the vault. As mentioned earlier, two things were kept in that vault room. One was the bank's inner safe where its own cash was kept, and the other was the safety deposit boxes in which customers stored their jewelry, papers, and money. The gang divided the work here as well. Two people set about opening the inner safe and the other two began breaking the locks of the deposit boxes. Their real target had been the inner safe. They expected to find millions of dollars in it. Cutting open the inner safe with the welding torch took them more than an hour. But when it was finally opened, what they saw astonished everyone. Inside the safe there were only $0 US. In fact, the bank staff had already removed most of the funds stored in the vault and sent them to the Federal Reserve before the Memorial Day weekend began. Because the bank was going to be closed for 3 consecutive days, and rules required that such a large sum not be left in the vault. Ironically, the very day the gang had chosen after months of labor and planning was the reason the vault was nearly empty. Finding only $0 US was far less than the amount they had hoped for, an amount that would have changed their lives forever. When hope from their primary target was dashed, they carefully shifted their focus to the safety deposit boxes to salvage the rest of the operation. At first they had not thought there would be much in those boxes, but now that was their only remaining route. However, as the night drew to a close and morning approached, they decided to stop work and return because they knew the bank would remain closed for 2 more days. The greatest strength of this entire heist was that they themselves were police officers, and the surveillance of a senior officer like Tommy gave them full confidence that if they were ordinary thieves, they would not have dared to return. But they did return the very next night. This time their entire focus was solely on the safety deposit boxes, breaking them open and taking whatever they could find. Surprisingly, they found far more in those boxes than they had expected. Cash, jewelry, gold, and many valuable items. Their focus changed, and that gamble paid off. They could not open all the boxes in a single night, so they decided to return for a third and final night. After working 3 consecutive nights and many hours of effort, what they finally obtained exceeded their expectations. About $1 million USD in cash, and roughly $8 million USD in jewelry and gold, i.e. a total of $1 million USD in loot. This was the lifelong haul they had dreamed of. Now they would never need to steal again. The gang first divided the cash equally among themselves. Each member received about $400,000 USD. But now the real problem began. How to divide the jewelry so that no one felt shortchanged, and so there would be no dispute. After a brief discussion and mutual understanding, they decided not to divide the jewelry among themselves, but to sell it first. Once it was converted into cash, it would be easier to split the amount equally. Because the jewelry was stolen and they had no legitimate documents, they thought of selling it to some underworld gang or criminal network at slightly reduced prices, so those buyers could later offload it by their own channels. That meant the jewelry would not be divided immediately. The responsibility for safekeeping the jewelry was given to Banks, because he was the gang member who had a secure place to hide it. Jera, who was the gang's leader, made it clear to everyone that they must remain extremely careful for the next few weeks. Keep the money hidden, don't flaunt it, and do nothing that would arouse police suspicion. He knew that as soon as the bank robbery was discovered, all investigative agencies would become active, and the FBI's involvement would be certain. Every gang member took his share, and Banks kept his Lex along with all the jewelry. After that, everyone returned to their homes. Now they only had to wait to see what the next day would bring. The next morning, when the bank staff returned after the holiday, what they saw shocked them. The bank's vault was completely empty. The safety deposit boxes lay broken and a large hole in the ceiling was clearly visible. As expected, the case was huge. Therefore, the FBI immediately took over the investigation. A local police team was also included in the probe, and that team included Tommy Dorsey, who was part of the entire robbery. Now his real job began. He started keeping an eye on every step of the investigation so that if any clue surfaced, he could handle it in time and keep everything under control. The gang had already been extremely careful. They had left no fingerprints, no tools, and no clue that would directly lead back to. But the initial assessments made by the FBI were a warning bell for the gang. The FBI was convinced that such deep knowledge and planning could not have come from an outside thief. Surely some local person, a bank employee, a security guard, or someone inside the police department was involved in the robbery. They already knew that corruption had spread in the local police, so they began to pay special attention to the police officers who were on duty that night, including senior officers like Jera and Tommy. Jera knew that suspicion could fall on him, but he was fully confident that he and his team had not left any evidence that could directly implicate them. When the FBI asked him about his location that night, Jera replied. He said that he was with his girlfriend that night, the same secret girlfriend mentioned earlier in this story. Jera had deliberately crafted this story to justify his whereabouts, because if he had said that he was at home with his wife and children, there was a danger that a family member might accidentally say something wrong and expose him. He felt the safest option was to say that he was with his girlfriend Barbara Hickey, and the truth was, after the robbery he really did go there. So the excuse was not completely false. Surely this might slightly damage his personal reputation, as his affair could be exposed. But at that time his biggest concern was saving himself from being implicated in the robbery. For that he needed solid testimony, and he gave that responsibility to Barbara. Jera had already explained everything to her, that if the police asked, she had to say Jera was with her that night. As planned, when the FBI questioned Barbara, she clearly said that Jera was there with her the entire night, and had not gone anywhere. After that, the FBI intensified its investigation. They interrogated other police officers, spoke with bank employees, and even questioned the owners of nearby shops. But despite such extensive and detailed questioning, they found no evidence that could lead them to the real thieves. Jera and Tommy, who were observing the investigation from within, now felt safe. They believed the FBI would never find solid proof. So they decided it was best to stay quiet and wait. They hoped that within a year the case would cool down, and that's exactly what happened. Months passed. Nearly a year went by, but the FBI's investigation found no major clues. It seemed that the case would soon be closed. During this time, Jera kept himself calm and hidden. But trouble began because of his two partners, Tommy and Joe. After the robbery, while Gerald carefully hid his money, Tommy and Joe spent theirs lavishly. They drowned themselves in alcohol, women, and drugs. Their lives became nothing but fun and party. Jera had given Joe the responsibility of keeping all the stolen jewelry so that it could later be sold for cash. But Joe began messing things up. He started gifting some jewelry to women and selling some on the black market to get more money for his wild lifestyle. When Tommy found out, he was furious. Since both were usually drunk, the situation quickly turned into a fight. In a fit of rage and intoxication, Tommy picked up a rifle and shot Joe. The police arrived at the scene and immediately arrested Tommy. Now the entire situation flipped. The case that had gone quiet reignited once again. Matters worsened when it was discovered that Joe was still alive. He had survived the gunshot. Because the fight had occurred between two police officers, not only the local police but also senior officers from the state police got involved in the investigation. The state police not only searched the place where the fight had occurred, but also thoroughly examined both Tommy's and Joe's car. When the police opened Joe's car trunk, what they found changed everything. Inside the trunk was a large bag containing part of the stolen jewelry and 1 kilogram of cocaine. Seeing this, the police immediately realized that this was not just a fight, it was connected to the same bank robbery that had happened on Memorial Day night and had been cold for a year. As soon as Jera got the news that Tommy had been caught, Joe was alive and stolen goods had been found in his car, he panicked completely. The two people who had been with him till now were now trapped in a police investigation. And the most dangerous thing was that the real evidence, the jewelry, was now in police hands. The very case he thought everyone had forgotten about had now exploded like a bomb over his head, and it was all because of his companion's carelessness. Now Gerald had only one option left: to stay silent, hide somewhere and hope his partners wouldn't reveal his name. He believed they wouldn't, because if they did, they themselves would be in deep trouble. And besides, no one had any solid evidence that could directly link Gerald to the crime. A few weeks later, the trial for Tommy's shooting of Joe began. Joe himself was present in court, alive but injured. He was called as a witness, and everyone expected him to talk only about the shooting incident. Tommy's lawyer argued in court that Joe's testimony could not be trusted because stolen jewelry and drugs had been found in his car, and he himself was an addict and a criminal. But when Joe was directly questioned, the entire courtroom fell silent. Without any fear or hesitation, Joe admitted that he used drugs and that he had also participated in the bank robbery on Memorial Day, and that Tommy was his partner in the crime. The whole courtroom was stunned. No one had expected him to reveal such a huge truth so openly. At the end of the trial, Tommy was found guilty of shooting Joe. But even more significant was that the FBI's attention immediately returned to that old bank robbery case. The FBI began interrogating Joe right away. Joe agreed to a deal. He said that if he received leniency in the robbery case, he would reveal the entire truth and name everyone involved. Although Joe's credibility was weak, being a drug addict and previously involved in several crimes, the information he provided began to point the FBI in the right direction. Now investigators turned their attention to Gerald's personal life. They discovered that Jera had ended his relationship with his girlfriend Barbara Hickey. The FBI called Barbara in for questioning again and assured her complete protection. When they asked her a few questions, Barbara revealed something that completely changed the direction of the case. She said that on the same night the bank was robbed, Jera had come to her house, and his clothes were covered in dust. Even his hair and face had a layer of cement on them. The FBI had been searching for such a clue for months. Barbara's statement now became very strong evidence for. After that, the FBI didn't waste any time. Jera was arrested directly from his home on charges of bank robbery. At the time of arrest, Jera was nervous but kept telling himself that he had left no evidence behind, and if he could get a good lawyer, he might prove himself innocent. But the real shock came when Barbara appeared in court to testify, and this time she was completely against him. She not only described that night but also openly talked about Gerald's behavior and words. She said that Jera often spoke of doing something big, something that would change his life forever. Sitting in court, Jera immediately realized that his escape was now impossible. Not only he, but the rest of his partners involved in the robbery were now caught in the web of the law. Tommy, who had shot Joe and whose actions had exposed the entire secret, was also now standing in the dock for the same case. Francis, the gangster who had participated in the robbery, and Bucky, who had disabled the alarm system, both were also now in court as co-accused in the same case. But the third corrupt police officer, Joe, had now become an FBI witness. In exchange for his testimony, he was granted full immunity, meaning he would not go to jail. In the end, the court found Gerald and his remaining companions guilty and sentenced them all to 30 to 40 years in prison. Now they had only two options: either grow old and die in prison, or after many years, be released into a world that had completely changed. The path they had chosen had destroyed their entire lives. Now there was no way back, and that is where this story ends. A true event in which the very men meant to uphold the law became the ones who broke it. In the beginning everything seemed perfect, but in the end everything fell apart. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the notification bell so that you get the next story first. On our channel, there are many more such true and shocking stories that you may have never heard before. See you again in the next video.